Well, we've hit the top of the hour, but we only have a couple of participants, and Karsten is not on yet, so we're going to wait a few minutes. Okay, well, now we have Karsten, but it's still just Karsten, Marco, and Russ. I'll give it till 5 after the hour, and then we'll start.
I'm actually also seeing Ira and Richard.
Yeah, hello everyone.
Yeah, it's the problem with, I just see Ira that I didn't, oh, there's Ricard, yeah. It's the problem with the sort that I'm not noticing the ones that say participant. Okay, well, then that's enough people. Let's get started. So welcome to the CBOR interim call, and there's one item on the agenda. It's Karsten's. It's to talk about coordination with Sedate and issues with the time tag document. Karsten, go for it. Your slides should be ready to share. Let's see. Grant.
Okay, here we are. I actually have any other business item at the end, which we might quickly want to discuss.
Okay.
So this should be short. We have been talking about the CBOR time tag for a couple of years already, and it has been the working group draft. And for a while, we haven't really done very much with it because we were waiting for the CDate working group to define the Internet Extended Date Time Format, which is essentially RFC 339 with the addition of hints. So the green stuff on this slide is a hint that can be added to an RFC 339 timestamp that is on the left side in white. Here we have a time zone hint, which says which time zone this is meant to be in, and an extension suffix that indicates this is best shown in the Hebrew calendar, which is, well, it's the example because it's the only such extension suffix that is currently defined. And in the previous version of the time tag document, we added map keys -10 and -11 to have time zone hints and extension suffixes. So we were kind of prepared, and what has now happened is that the sedate working group thinks they are done. Now we suddenly had to do our homework because there were a few TBDs in the document still. TBDs that I think all have pretty obvious resolutions, but of course we have to look at whether Henk and I did this in the right way. By the way, Henk apologizes again because he has this standing conflict with the even week meetings at this time slot. So we had to fill in some IANA considerations. We had to put in some clarifications about durations. I didn't prepare slides on these, but I think if you care about durations, you may want to read the additional text that is trying to clarify them. And of course, we copied update over from the sedate changes to their ABNF because their ABNF essentially governs what map keys 10 and 11 can point to. So the intention is that time tag 02 is ready to go. Of course, what sedate is doing at this point is alerting a wider group of people about one thing they have been doing, which was actually updating 3339 because there is an interoperability issue. If that update goes through, of course, it ripples through a lot of documents that are using 3339. But I think the actual practice should be closer to what the result of the update will be than to what is before the update. So I CC'd the message that went out to Art at IETF.org to the CBOR working group, so you know this is going on. And so far we just had one request for information. So let's see how that is going. So just cleaning up things on our side, IANA considerations. Timescales are an obvious extension points. We currently only have TAI and UTC in the document, which are the obvious ones that you want to have. And additional timescales like GPS or NTP can be accommodated by just converting them into TAI and UTC. So timescales that have a well-defined conversion, such as a constant offset. GPS is just 19 seconds different from TAI, so there's really no point in supporting that for interchange. You should be using TAI then. So these should not be registered, and the policy here is a combination of expert review and RFC required. So RFC required is probably the right thing for something that is as grave as adding a timescale. It's not IETF review, it's RFC required, so people can actually do something like do an IRTF document for a new timescale or even an independent submission. But that's the reason why we want to add expert review to that as well. So we cannot just have a random independent submission defining timescales that then turn out not to be interoperable. So Henk commented that maybe we should add UT1 as well. So UT1 is essentially the smooth version of UTC, or the target to which UTC adjusts itself using leap seconds. This is, of course, interesting to everybody who actually points into the sky or looks into the sky. So it's pretty popular with astronomers, but these astronomers also have some other timescales, and I'm not exactly an expert on these things. So I was a bit hesitant adding UT1, but maybe we should at some point have a document called CBOR in space that does all these space-specific things that have turned up in the context of CBOR, and where we get some experts who actually understand how UT1 is defined in such a way that we can actually reference this as a standards based timescale. So we can always register this later. So I don't see a big problem with sticking with TAI and UTC, but we could add timescales that people really have applications for. So that's the timescale registry. The MapKey registry is pretty obvious. It's pre-filled with the map keys that are defined in the spec, in the time tag draft, and the policy for additional registrations will be specification required, which also includes expert review, but does this by definition of the term. And there's also a request to the expert reviewers to curate the good code points, so somebody shouldn't go ahead and get 1 million code points just for some very, very limited coverage project, and then we don't have compact code points for the time tag anymore. So this was not entirely trivial, doing the INA considerations, but I think it also is pretty clear that the general direction is the right one. Any comments on this slide? Good. We had the discussion about floating time, and floating time is a time that is bound to something like a time zone or a time offset from the time scale only by local context. So if I tell somebody we'll meet tomorrow morning at 8, that is a floating time, because this communication only makes sense if we have common context that identifies which time zone I mean by 8. So these are often useful, and we actually have tag 100, which is based on floating times. But when discussing this, we noticed that the NTP working group is also looking at floating times, and the assumption here is that we want to do this in a way that is compatible with what NTP will come up with, but it will take another year or so, or a year and a half, for that to converge. So this probably should be added later. So that would be my recommendation for issue number 4, won't fix. Issue number 8 actually came up after we submitted the -02, because there is an inconsistency right now in the document. The document has negative map keys, which are ignorable information items, and it has unsigned ones, non-negative ones, that are critical. And the status so far was that the only critical piece of information was the base time, So only one key could ever be unsigned, the base time key, which could be a different 1, 4, or 5, depending on the representation of the base time, but there could only be one of them. And now it turns out we have critical information, so information that must be understood by the consumer of the tag, and it makes sense to use unsigned non-negative keys for those. So essentially, the obvious or straightforward fix for this is to limit this only one key restriction to the base time keys. And then, of course, we need to know whether a key is a base time key or not. But since all the critical keys are the ones that the consumer is supposed to know to process the document, the specification of the critical key can include the information whether that actually delivers base time or some additional information like these Internet Extended Datetime Format keys 10 and 11. So I think that's also pretty straightforward. And finally, one thing that came up, we have a pretty good set of map keys that describe time in more detail, which are essentially stolen from PTP, from IEEE 1588, not directly, but through their Yang model through the Yang model that the IETF has created for 1588. And that is pretty useful because we can replace some ad hoc stuff with that. However, there is one piece of information that currently cannot be expressed, and that is whether the timestamp is a planned or computed timestamp or an actual time. And that may be important because timescales are not entirely predictable. If they were entirely predictable, we wouldn't need several of them. We would just use one. So we know how TAI and UTC relate to each other for the past, but we don't know it for the future, at least the future more than a few months ahead because of leap seconds. So a planned time that is defined in terms of the UTC timescale may be moving relative to the TAI timescale, which means that you cannot really translate a UTC planned time into a TAI planned time, while an actual time is one that already has happened. So you know the timescale characteristics. Actually, there are some details here with realizations of timescales, which mean that you may not actually know this immediately, but at least at some point you know when exactly that was, and so they can be reliably translated between timescales. So all this stuff is really only of interest to people who care of accuracy down to a second or less. So for most applications, you can completely ignore this. But for applications that need this, and yes, actually, even some security applications want to know when something happened very precisely. There may be useful to add a flag for the distinction. So my current view of this feature is we definitely want to have that, but we may want to wait until we have talked to enough time nuts to understand whether we actually want to add more information to this than just the flag between planned and actual times. So since these keys can be registered by anyone, it's not hard to add that. So here again, my recommendation would be one fix. So with that said, We are now entering this discussion, which happens on several mailing lists: the ART mailing list, the CDATE mailing list, NTP and TikTok have been addressed, and of course the CBOR mailing list. So within the next 2 weeks, we might get some additional issues, some additional information, some additional editorial corrections as well. So my assumption would be we should be able to have a -03 ready for working group last call before IETF 115, at or before October 24th. So if we do a working group last call immediately, we might have completed that at IETF 115 and should be able to process the working group last call comments at 115. Ira.
I hope this is working.
Yes.
A question about the flag for planned time versus actual time. Functionally, it makes good sense to me, but how do we know that the originator sets the flag correctly, and doesn't it have really bad side effects if they set it to planned, but it is actual, because we can't translate?
Well, this would.
Is this flag is more dangerous than not addressing the issue?
Well, it would be an optional flag, so it would only be provided by producers that actually care about this issue. And for those producers, yes, you would hope that they have made up their mind of what they put there.
Right, and not done a hard coding in their code like most implement. That's what I'm concerned about, that somebody adds it thinking, oh, I should add this flag, and then fixes the value such that it diminishes the utility of the flag.
Yeah, so the recommendation and the default should be to not add this flag unless you know what you're doing. And I think that's a good point. But yeah, for those that do know what they are doing, it's useful to be able to express this.
Yeah, I gather that. I guess we need a strong recommendation that you be careful not to add the flag unless you really know what you're doing and need to distinguish planned time.
Yeah, so in the financial community, for instance, you would, if you know a particular base rate adjustment will be announced by the Feds in January 15th, at a particular point in time, you know that this is a planned time that is fixed to UTC. So if somebody adds a leap second at the end of this year, you know that leap second will be considered when making that time.
I see. That was a good example too. Perhaps an example in the spec, of a practical application of planned time.
Sounds good. Okay, any comments on what I said and the plan I'm proposing here?
Okay, so
Yes, it's a good plan, and I think moving for working group last call soon and trying to process it at 115 would be a fine idea, because as you say, it's been floating around for a couple of years, and it would be nice to have closure, and Sedate would be pleased too, as I'm sure you would.
Good, and I apologize again for Henk not being here, because he's actually getting pressure from people now that this needs to become an RFC before they can integrate that into their SDO application standards. So indeed, we should finish this now.
Okay, I guess we finished that agenda item. Last call for comments on that now. All right, Karsten, what's your AOB?
Well, the AOB is just a pointer to a discussion that is happening in the COSI working group right now, which I think is relatively typical about discussions that we will see when CBOR is used in a field that has previous ad hoc data structures. And the discussion in the COSI working group is about the new HPKE key exchange. And that is a slightly weird document, because it defines abstract forms of components going into and coming out of this key exchange. But there's also an expectation that HPKE gets to set the representation of these data, for instance, actual keys, in particular asymmetric keys. And we know that asymmetric keys have had very different representations over time, complicated by the fact that some of these representations used to have patent claims on them. So it's really a complicated area. And I was very surprised to read message on the COSI mailing list that apparently the result of the discussion was not to use the COSI way of representing keys, but use the HPKE way, which, as I said, is not really fully defined at this point. One of the things that we did when we defined COSI was trying to get rid of 20, 30 years old baggage and weird key representations, and come up with key representations that would be easy to process on constrained devices. So I just wanted to point to this discussion, because there may be more people that actually have an opinion on this than is currently visible on the mailing list. Russ.
So thank you, Karsten, for raising this topic. But I think that the characterization of the discussion is incomplete. On one hand, people want to use the same COSI structures for public keys. That's the approach you have just articulated and supported. On the other hand, people want to use HPKE libraries without modification. And that modification would be to change the encoding from whatever that library uses to the COSE one. I believe the discussion is over, and that the people who want to use the unmodified libraries won. And as a result of that, I have withdrawn my name as author from that document.
Yeah, I must admit I haven't followed the whole discussion. So maybe it's my fault not to have looked at this. But yeah, in the IETF, we try to do the right thing and not stick to decisions that are wrong, unless we have a deployed base that uses the result of these decisions. So I'm not entirely sure that the fact that the discussion is over means that we cannot have this discussion now. So that's why I'm bringing this up. I really don't understand what it means to use an HPKE library representation because unless that is standardized, it doesn't mean anything.
Well, in the HPKE spec, the place where that appears is opaque. And so that's really the thrust of the argument is, do you have to convert the opaque thing into a cozy key or not? And because the HPKE interface basically treats that as a internal thing that does not need to be standardized. And anyway, I think that that's going in the wrong direction. As I already said, that's the reason for my stepping away from that document.
Okay, so raising attention here to this item is about all we can do here. But I think that this is a major change in the underlying principles of how COSI operates, which should be worked on by the COSI people, of course, but I'm not sure that this is being curated in the right way right now. Anyway, we will need to discuss this in the COSI environment.
Okay, Carsten, thanks for bringing that up.
Maybe not today, but are we going to talk about CDDL 2.0 at IETF 115 or not?
Well, I think so. I haven't managed to get the drafts out before this interim, and the next one is on the 19th. So there is still a little opportunity, a window of opportunity for me to do that. And yeah, I'm still optimistic, but yes, we should discuss this in 115.
Okay. CDDL 2, of course, has much interest far beyond the IETF. And my 2 cents on the cozy and hybrid public key is merely to observe that the NSA has come down strongly against hybrid public key in CNSA 2.0, and NIST doesn't be supporting it as much. So I also really dislike the idea that it doesn't matter that it's opaque in some hybrid public library in the road for cozy and for things derived from cozy, of which there are far more than any of us know.
Please
Sorry,
share
Russ?
your views, Jose Liz.
Okay, yes, we, Christian and I do need to put together the agenda for the 115 session. So we'll be posting something to the list soon about that. Anything else from anyone? Ira?
Even if
I
we
would
don't,
also be careful that I think your definition of hybrid that you just used and the definition of hybrid in the HPKE spec are 2 different things.
well, it was actual staff of NSA on other lists, not in the IETF, recently expressing lack of interest in specifically HPKE as defined in the RFC 9180 that I was
Okay,
referring to.
because they've also come out and spoke against what could be called composite, but
Yeah.
just wanted to make sure you were
Right,
not
yeah, well,
conflating those two.
I agree. HPKE has as many meanings as there are people talking about it, or maybe a few more. And that is another problem. Composite versus and so on. With respect to CDDL 2.0, Karsten, I would suggest that we still want to talk about it at 115 in slideware, if not in specs. That we want to encourage the larger IETF and out of IETF community that we're taking seriously moving on with CDDL 2.0 because there's certainly a lot of perceived need for it in many places.
Right.
Okay, anything else? All right, Marco, thanks again for great notes. Really appreciate that. And we'll have another one of these in 2 weeks. Thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye bye.
Thank you.